Bloat in dogs can be one of the more terrifying things that we think of as dog owners. It can be very scary to think about the restlessness and the drooling and the potential twisting and all of those things. And so today we want to talk about bloat and what is it actually? What are the causes for it? What kind of poses a higher risk for bloat? And then what are things that we can do to prevent and treat it if it does occur? We just want to kind of break all of that down. So first, let's talk about what is bloat.
So bloat is also called gastric dilatation. And then in some cases where the stomach's going to twist on its axis. So that is gastric dilatation and volvulus. But basically it happens when dogs are eating fast. Typically they're eating dry food. Then often they'll drink a lot of water, but they're kind of gulping a lot of air while they're eating and drinking. And then in the stomach, the air separates from everything else, and whoop, the air rises to the top, and the stomach becomes this gas-filled balloon, and then it can twist on its axis. In which case, it is a serious emergency. Even more recently, in the last couple of years, it seems like the referral in emergency hospitals won't even go to surgery if it's been going on for longer than 12 hours because they feel like the gut is so compromised that the dog is just not going to recover. And so that's, I think, is a terrible, terrible situation to be in. And you and I both have kinds of dogs that would be predisposed to bloat. So it kind of more often it's the deep-chested breed. So think about, bird dogs, shepherds, the bully breeds. Except for Frenchies because they're not deep-chested. They're round.
Boxers would be another.
Boxers are quite deep-chested. Great Danes. Really, the cause basically comes down to feeding kibble. That's like one of the biggest causes. And there have been all sorts of experiments done where they've tried elevated food dishes compared to non-elevated food dishes. And that turns out really not to make a difference. But feeding dry food, and especially feeding dry food dry, turns out to be a huge problem.
So if you look at kind of the last 15 or 20 to 30 years, it was actually a little bit longer than that, you'll see this huge rise in cases of bloat, and that coincides very much with kibble becoming the norm of what's being fed to dogs. So it just does lend itself to create a lot of gas in the gut. Another thing to think about is, creating a calm eating environment so that they are not eating so fast, gulping their food, that type of thing. You're going to reduce the risk that way too.
Right. And so one of the things I always think about is, don't just put the dog's dish down in the middle of the kitchen floor while you're trying to empty the dishwasher and the kids are coming home from school and people are traipsing through the kitchen. I always think nobody wants that seat in the restaurant. You want the quiet seat in the corner where you're not near the bathroom and nobody's going to bother you. Yeah. And so with our dogs too, dogs are fast eaters, and I always kind of laugh at the slow feeders because there's really no reason to try to slow them down when you're feeding raw food. But you do want your dog to be calm about feeding time. It reduces resource guarding. And so even separating dogs during feeding time, that's kind of the norm in my household. I don't let my dogs interact. I don't want one dog trying to eat and the other dog standing there breathing on them, right? It's just gonna make them eat faster and gulp their food more. So I feed my dogs in their kennels. We have quiet time before and after, so I don't let my dogs come running in from outside where they're like all,
Right.
They're gonna be calm, get your breath back in control. If you're gonna have a drink, and then settle for about half an hour before I feed them. And then we have half an hour of quiet time after they've eaten so they can just start to digest their food a little bit.
So, ways to kind of prevent this is what we're going through. So you want to kind of limit the stress around the eating environment and when they do eat. Certainly, keep any intense activity or exercise, a half an hour away from feeding time in either direction.
And some people will do an hour.
Yeah, I usually do 45 minutes, but I mean, really the point is that they're not overheated, they're not panting, breathing hard, that kind of thing. So another thing, obviously, that we would say, it really is heavily related to feeding dry food dry. And so our next thing that we're going to talk about reducing the risk is really feeding fresh food is going to really eliminate a lot of the risk by itself. And so feeding, raw or, gently cooked, something like that is going to and no low carbohydrate, right? Because it's the carbs that are really kind of doing the damage.
Yeah, they're fairly indigestible, and then also they cause a lot of gas production. And so basically, if you have a dog who's kind of gassy or tends to burp a lot after eating, now hiccuping in puppies is kind of normal, but that typically goes away kind of by the time they're adolescents. They're not so hiccupy. But if you see a lot of, gas kind of moving in and out of your dog, switch them to raw food if you haven't already done that, and address the microbiome. So, for example, Standard Process makes a supplement called lactic acid yeast. Let's say you're already feeding raw, but your dog is still quite gassy, or certain proteins make them gassier. I always prescribe lactic acid yeast. It's one of their human supplements, and it modifies the microbiome through its effect on gut pH. So it's not a probiotic. The dog doesn't have to get the exact right bacteria in there because it'll affect the pH, which is going to favor the normal bacteria over the gas-producing bacteria. Now, sometimes when you start that supplement, it comes as wafers, which are chewable tablets. They don't taste bad. I've taken it. So I always have people start with like one wafer twice a day. If it's a tiny dog, I might go lower. And then if they get gassier, like let's say the gas amps up and your dog is starting to kind of clear the room, then you double the dose for a week. So then you give 2 wafers twice a day for a week, and then see if you can drop back down to 1 wafer twice a day. And if not, then you keep them at the higher dose. It has like 0 adverse effects. But if you have a dog who's burpy, gassy, then you need to address some gut issues.
So those are the best ways to kind of help to prevent bloat from becoming an issue. One thing that we really want to talk about is a conventional approach to preventing bloat, which is gastropexy. But that is not something that we would recommend.
Right. Gastropexy is a surgical technique where you peel off the outer layer of the stomach and either tack that directly to the body wall. There are some techniques where you wrap that around a rib and staple it back to the other side of the stomach, effectively immobilizing the stomach. And I see this recommended in all sorts of deep-chested breeds. So boxers, standard poodles, Great Danes, some Labradors. That is just not something that I would recommend. Your intestines are supposed to move. One of the things that keeps your peristalsis normal, like the normal activity of the intestines during digestion, is movement. And so basically, the stomach has to be able to kind of slide around in your abdomen as you move in order for motility to remain normal. And so that's why, to some extent, walking a dog is really important. So when you take a dog for a walk and they're walking or trotting, which is even better, this is why not every walk can be a sniffari. The motion of the diaphragm on the abdominal organs is what regulates digestion. This is why I think dogs, especially smaller and elderly dogs, have kind of more gut problems, more issues with anal glands, more issues with not pooping regularly in winter. Because winter in Minnesota is horrible. There are long stretches of time where nobody wants to go outside. And it can't really, some people are really good about walking their dog around inside their house, but some dogs aren't, or some people don't have the time to do that. But really going for that regular walk and trot particularly. So we always think of the diaphragm it's always taught in relation to the respiratory system and to the chest. It's like the dividing line, the dividing muscle between the chest cavity and the abdominal cavity. But we forget about the action of the diaphragm on the intestines and on all the abdominal organs. So basically, as the dog trots, that diagonal movement, the diaphragm is going squish, 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 squish. And it's basically wringing out the abdominal organs and letting them fill back up, and wringing them out and letting them fill back up. And that is how you get normal gastrointestinal motility, which is basically how food normally moves through the gastrointestinal tract. And if your stomach is stapled to your body wall, that can't happen. But since bloat is essentially a dry food disease, and there's other things that we can do to help it not happen,
Right.
permanently altering your dog's body does not seem like the greatest option.
So just to recap, it's the really easy ways to kind of prevent and reduce the risk for bloat. Number one, you're going to create a stress-free environment so they're not eating too fast, gulping their food down. You're going to limit exercise and high-intense activity 30 to 45 minutes on either side of a meal. That's number two. Number three, obviously, we would always suggest feed raw. When you stay away from the dry food, you're really just going to limit the overall risk for that. If you do have a dog that tends to be gassy, burp a lot, that type of thing, there's relatively inexpensive, easy supplements to address that issue. So just reducing the gas that is present in your dog. And really, just to kind of come back around to that, surgically immobilizing the digestive system like that is really has the potential for a lot of other ramifications, and that's just not something that we would recommend. So really, yes, is bloat scary? Does it have? Absolutely, but it's actually quite easy to prevent with just a few kind of proactive steps. And so hopefully this helps, and this will maybe reduce a little bit of anxiety for some people and realize that it's actually really easy to manage and prevent bloat.